Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Reid, and I'm Spiritual Director here at Centers for Spiritual Living, and I am so happy to be here at the Baha'i Center. We want to thank the Baha'i Center for hosting us here, and I want to say that the venue is lovely and wonderful, and we really appreciate it, and don't get too comfortable. Because at some point, we will be moving on. We'll be finding our right and perfect home. But for now, this is home. This is our home away from home, and we're really grateful to be here. And so let me wish a happy Father's Day to all the fathers in the room. Happy Father's Day. And I want to wish a happy Father's Day to all of you who had fathers. Happy Father's Day. And so I think that's inclusive, don't you? Yep, absolutely. We have this beautiful annual theme of rising higher and growing deeper. And our monthly theme is in living color. And in the month of June, there are so many things that really represent this beautiful idea of in living color. In the month of June, we have Juneteenth, which is the celebration of African American freedom in this country. You may not know the little story behind Juneteenth. It's actually a really big story, but I'm going to keep it short, so that's why it's little. On June 19th of 1865, the last township in the U.S. that had not freed their slaves learned that they were free, even though the Emancipation Proclamation happened 2.5 years earlier. And so it is this celebration of freedom for our African American brothers and sisters, siblings, if you will. And so Juneteenth happens this month. It's Pride Month, and so this is the opportunity for our friends who are LGBTQ2+ to celebrate their own individuation of God in their form, and so we celebrate Pride. It's also, you may not know this, but in June, did you know that it's also National Age Without Apology Month? And it's also National Candy Month. How about that? This idea of celebrating diversity, from dads to seniors to candies to African Americans, really speaks to this topic of in living color. And yet sometimes folks who are students and practitioners of this philosophy that we call Centers for Spiritual Living and Science of Mind wonder, and we have these questions about how do we celebrate diversity and still claim to be a movement that proclaims oneness, right? Do they clash? Do they not connect in some way? They seem contradictory, don't you agree? On the surface, just on the surface. And so this month, we're really focusing in this idea of living color, where we're celebrating diversity in so many ways. We're also asking the question, how can we focus on our differences and still claim to hold this idea that all life is one? And so I want to start with a wonderful quote from Ernest Holmes. Ernest Holmes wrote in The Science of Mind, page 417, if you're interested, to assert our individuality is to rise above the law of averages into that more highly specialized use of the law which brings freedom rather than bondage. And so Holmes is referencing the power that we have to rise above mass consciousness, the generally accepted idea of whatever's going on in the world and in the culture. If you have been a student of this philosophy for any time, you understand that what we think and what we pay attention to actually draws things to us. There's a law of attraction and a law of circulation and a law of correspondence, and all three of these laws and principles work in a little bit of a different way, but to sum it up and to oversimplify it, we are attracting what we are believing. And so in a world where we are heavily influenced in what to believe, Holmes is talking about the power to rise above mass consciousness so that we can experience our individual uniqueness. And we don't do this to differentiate ourselves, just to say, look at me, like I talked about 2 weeks ago, but to celebrate our authentic expression as individuated centers of God in our own personal being. Each one of us, each one of you, is an individuated expression of the divine. And I say that a lot because our culture doesn't really reflect that to us, does it? It doesn't necessarily reflect to us that we're each unique expressions of God. No, the culture's typically, and you know, a lot of it's marketing, right? Because people are selling things. Our culture is trying to steer us to different ideas, to different products, to different ways of being, to different ways of looking. And if whatever's in the mass consciousness isn't being reflected back to you as who you are, then you might feel a little outside of whatever you're recognizing and noticing in the mass consciousness. And so this idea of diversity is really about celebrating our authentic expression. And oftentimes our authentic expression doesn't fit the label of the norm or whatever we've normalized in our culture. And it reminds me of this cute little story. Maybe you've heard about it, of the eagle in the chicken coop. There was a naturalist who was traveling the land, and he happened upon a farm, and he went in to visit a farmer and was looking over his land and his animals and his crops, and he noticed right there in the middle of the chickens, scratching and pecking, was an eagle. And he said, what the heck is that? This is the most majestic of birds, a bird of prey, and here he is acting like a chicken. What's going on with that? And the farmer explained that he had found an egg and he had put it into the chicken coop, and the egg had hatched, and it turned out to be an eagle, but the eagle was brought up as a chicken. That's all he knew was chickenness. And so he thought he was a chicken. And the naturalist was like, he's an eagle. He says, do you mind if I work with him a little bit? So the naturalist went in and he picked up the eagle and he said, Eagle, you are the most majestic of birds. Fly to the heavens. And the eagle kind of looked around, looked at the guy, looked down at the safety of his buddies, hopped out of his hands and back in with the chickens, scratching and pecking and being a chicken. The naturalist tried a couple more times, and the eagle was just not having any of it. So the naturalist went on his way. But the next day he came back to the farmer's house, and he said, I want to try one other thing. I would like to take the eagle out to his natural environment and see if that changes anything. So he took him out into the wild, and he showed the eagle the mountains and the sky and the area around him, and he said, you are a grand bird of prey, and you belong in the heavens. Fly. And he let the bird go, and it flew into the sky to rediscover its true nature. And I love that story for our topic today, because sometimes we are eagles amongst chickens, right? We have traits or things that are important to us or ways of being that don't necessarily look like the people around us. We don't necessarily feel like we belong. There's some urging within us that says there's something in me that wants to be expressed. And so this idea of diversity is really giving us this invitation to express our authenticity in beautiful and powerful and unique ways to each one of us. Unique ways to each one of us. Now, a sense of belonging is really important, right? It's been important to the maturation of civilizations, and it came about in a time when not belonging meant life or death. And we have held on to that sense of belonging for survival. But there comes a point where our need to belong can thwart us. It can limit us. And it's important to recognize that we can express ourselves in unique and authentic ways that might be different from the crowd and still shine and belong. And that's where our principle of oneness brings us back home. Because you may feel like you're too small or too tall or too large or too heavy or too thin. You might think your skin color is you're too brown or you're too white. There's lots of different ways that you can differentiate yourself. But if you're putting that too in front of it, maybe too young or too old, right? If we're putting that word T-O-O, too, in front of it, it means we're not in a place of self-love and self-acceptance. And so when we step out into the world, knowing our oneness, our divinity, that we are all come from this amazing power that expresses itself in so many brilliant ways, and then really own what is ours to give, what is ours to express, and to just peel away those labels. There was a wonderful video that the Baha'is showed last week at their soul journey that really expressed this idea that somehow along the way we have gotten lost behind our labels. We have gotten lost behind our looking outward into and listening to the environment around us. I'll call it the chickenness, right? To reflect back to that story. We look out among the world and try to fit ourselves into a mold as opposed to starting right here where we are, tapping into our authentic nature and standing proud in who we came here to be. Now that can be a scary thing in our society. And there are people who have not felt appreciated. They have not felt welcome. They have not felt like they belong. And it's still happening today. But as a movement, and I'm going to call us a force of nature, if you will, we have the ability to be part of a world that works for all, a world that begins to really understand that diversity and differences are simply the way God is choosing to express itself, and that at the heart of all of that is our divinity. And I acknowledge that it's important for us to feel safe, but I think sometimes safety can be a place where we get stuck or start to really swim in the pool of our limitations. And so I have this other great quote from Ernest Holmes, and it was actually in the Science of Mind magazine this month, which you can find out on the table there. If you're not reading this, there's great articles and wonderful daily readings. And so the quote for today, I thought fit perfectly. And so Holmes in The Anatomy of Healing Prayer writes, "Everything that is of the nature of limitation is but the limitless flow, flowing through us at the level of our acceptance of life." I'm going to say that again. Everything that is the nature of limitation is but the limitless flow, flowing through us at the level of our acceptance of life. He goes on to say, "Therefore, we are not fighting the evil with the good. We're not combating hate with love, nor fear with faith. This is not a process of healing, but a revelation of the healed, the whole, the complete, and the perfect. We are merely establishing at a higher level the action of that which is eternal and perfect." And so Holmes is talking about that our healing is really expressing ourselves at an authentic level, and that we're not battling things that are different. No, not at all. We are simply aligning with the wholeness that already exists within each one of us. Right? It's about alignment. It's not about fighting. And we have a lot of differences and discord out there, people who feel differently about things, and we're focusing on the differences opposed to finding the connecting point. And I'm with many of you, it's not easy for me to think about the things that I value and that are important to me, and then to hear somebody talk about them in a way that feels like it doesn't support that. And how to embrace that, and how to move forward, and how to come to that place of remembering this key principle that the divinity in all life individuates itself in authentic ways. And so our work as religious scientists, as practitioners of this philosophy, is to really lean into the places where we may have some judgments, and to look at how we can elevate those judgments to discernments, and maybe elevate those discernments so that we can begin to appreciate our differences and appreciate the places where we don't see eye to eye. I, for one, use it as a spiritual practice. For me, it's a spiritual practice when I am triggered, when there's something that I don't agree with, I use it as a spiritual practice to see if I'm stuck in an echo chamber. Am I really attached to a certain idea? Is there some place where I'm not seeing things from a different perspective? And none of that requires that I abandon my values. They just require me to be curious and to understand that this divine nature of life expresses itself in a lot of different ways. And some I understand and appreciate and embrace, and in some I just sort of like, really? But I can do that from a place of love and appreciation. I remember, I think it was early on in my practitioner days, I was taught that I didn't have to like everybody, but I had to love you. I had to find a place to love you, even if I didn't like you. And it is in that place of finding the ability to love life, no matter how it shows up, that we begin to walk these principles out into the world, and we begin to generate more peace. I know this is a tall order. I get it. I'm right there with you, shoulder to shoulder. But it's necessary. We're hurting each other. We're rejecting each other wholesale. In order for us to really realize this beautiful vision of a world that works for all, we have to look through the lens of love. I had a story for you, but I guess I'll save that for next week. I will share this one quote with you that I think is profound from that story. When nothing disturbs the balance of nature, the natural order reveals itself in perfect harmony. When nothing disturbs the balance of nature, the natural order reveals itself in perfect harmony. And when I read that quote, it made so much sense to me. It's about surrendering my egoic ideas and paying attention to what's going on around me, and trying to find a place where I can look through the lens of love and step out in some kind of harmonious way, even when I feel agitated inside. Holmes' quote about the limitless flow of the divine that's flowing through us at a level of our acceptance of life will begin to expand when we recognize that whatever we see is temporary. Whatever we're experiencing is a temporary projection from our acceptance of life. And so when we can allow ourselves to expand our level of acceptance, when we can be willing to do that, notice I didn't say acquiescence, very different from acceptance. But when we can find a level of acceptance, all this stuff that's going on, it's temporary, people. What is eternal is the divinity that lives in each one of us, that divines itself, that expresses itself uniquely and individuated in each one of us. I don't have to live life like someone else. I get to live my life from an authentic place, and everybody else gets to do the same thing. That's a high and noble principle that we can hold that gives us the ability to look at diversity through the lens of oneness and reconcile those two ideas as we move through our week. So my invitation to you is to be curious, to press into those places where you feel triggered or you can notice yourself judging, to look for where you can, rather than tap into the comforts of old ways of thinking, that maybe there's a new idea that wants to come forward for you. And I don't know what it is, and I don't know the answer. I do know the process. So I trust the process, and I invite you to do the same. Thank you very much. So let's do what we do every Sunday. We pray. We pray. We do this thing called spiritual mind treatment. We allow ourselves to drop down into that power and the presence that lives within us, that one immutable and divine presence that always has its way with us. So to this morning and this week, I invite us to simply surrender, to expand our level of acceptance, to be willing to look beyond what we think we know to what may want to be known. And I trust that when we do this, embraced by the love of the divine, as our unique and beautiful and authentic expression, looking out through love at other unique and authentic expressions, that something new comes forward, some opportunity, some potentiality, some possibility that only the eyes of love could have seen. And so this is a grand invitation to be in love with the divine, to see it despite its disguise, to recognize the power of oneness that shines through diversity, and to know that we are not bound by our past, but instead we can step into this place of being willing to have a new idea, a new thought, a new expression, to love ourselves and each other with equal measure, so that God may love itself here on earth. What a beautiful idea. I invite each one to embody this, to embrace this, to know this as their truth as we move through our time here, albeit brief, on planet Earth. It is with love that I simply anchor this prayer. I know this highest truth, and together we say, and so it is.